Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of air safety and your own personal safety, we ask that you keep a close watch on your carry-on and personal items.
Welcome to the AeroExploration podcast, where aviation's past, present, and future meet. We explore the stories that build aviation history, take you inside the industry today, and uncover the career paths and innovations keeping the industry in motion. We go behind the scenes, into the cockpit, and onto the ramp, meeting the people and discovering the places that define aviation. If it's part of the flying world, you'll find it here. This is AeroExploration.
Well, hello there, everyone. My name is Jim. Welcome back to the AeroExploration podcast. On this episode, I'm going to cover something a little bit different. It's going to be a solo show. And recent weather that we've had in the Twin Cities and the upper Midwest has led me down this path of exploring airport snow removal. I know it sounds like a weird topic, but it's super relevant in the last week or so in this part of the country. I've had friends stranded in different parts of the country with the winter weather that we have been experiencing, and it got me wondering, how do these major airports keep operations going as long as they do? And when they close, what does it take to get these airports back open? So I did some deep diving and some research on my own, and I'm going to chat a little bit about what actually goes on in the background to get these operations moving. So more on that in just a couple minutes. So from the podcasting and production standpoint, this is about the fourth video podcast that I've produced now. And I'm curious what people's thoughts are. If anyone has any feedback, any thoughts, suggestions, topics I should be covering in this format, I'm super interested to hear from you. So you can leave me an email, jim@flyingmidwest.com, or you can leave a comment on this video. Let me know how I'm doing and what you would like to see. What could I improve? I want to make a good product for everyone out there. So let me know. So in the fun world of flight instructing, I started my first flight review. And when I say started, I mean weather got in the way, kind of as we've been talking about for what the topic of this episode is. We did some ground stuff. We got into the air, and the winter weather started moving in. So the person I was flying with made a really good call, some good situational awareness, and decided, you know what, let's make it back to the airport before this thing really rolls in. Make sure we don't get stuck up here. So I hope to finish that flight review tomorrow. And after I'm done with all that and maybe do a couple more, I'll give some of my thoughts on what it feels like to actually be doing this for real now instead of just doing simulations with my instructor. So stay tuned for those in the future. I hope to talk about that and maybe answer some questions folks might have about what's it like now that I've made that move to actually teaching people and doing flight reviews and checkouts. So ask me your questions if you got them. More to come on that. Also in the flight instructing space, I'm doing a little bit more with my social media platforms as well. So reels, they're seeing more short form content. I'm taking some of that from the podcast. I'm taking some of it from some of the videos. And I'm also trying to do incorporate like these training tip Tuesdays. And I've introduced this series of kind of guess where this aviation incident happened. So more content in that regard. So if you're not seeing that and you want to be, go to any of my social media platforms. So Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Those are all at Aero_Exploration. And Aero is AERO because this is aviation, not bows and arrows. The last bit of housekeeping I have before I get into the actual topic of this episode itself is just some of the support that people could be able to give to the podcast if you're interested. So those who might be interested in supporting the podcast in a financial way, you can do so by joining the Patreon for Flying Midwest Media. So I'll put a link for that down in the show notes below. You could also support us by our affiliate links. And what might those be? Well, first of all, there is Flying Eyes Eyewear. I've been wearing those for a few years now. Great sunglasses for aviation, great under your headset. And we have a promo code. So if you enter Flying Midwest 10, when you make your purchase, you will get 10% off of your purchase of Flying Eyes. And any purchase you make with that code also helps to go support the podcasts. Plural. Hey, and speaking of headsets, we also have an affiliate link for Lightspeed headsets. I've been flying with them for over a decade. Wouldn't dream of flying with anything else for noise reduction headsets. I'll probably be looking at a different pair in the near future as well, now that I have my CFI rating. So check them out. Affiliate link down in the show notes below as well. All right, so talking about winter weather and airport operations. So this isn't a tips for pilots type of video. This is just a informative what goes on behind the scenes at these major airports to keep them clear and keep them operating as long as they can during winter storms. So they actually start prepping for these winter operations all the way back in the summer and early fall. So what are they working on in the summer and the early fall that they would start so early? Well, there are dozens of pieces of equipment at these major airports, and they have to inspect it, make sure that it's in operating condition. If there's any flaws or anything that needs to be repaired, it would be done then. They're also going to test some of this equipment. So actually taking it out as far as like they've got some sweepers that they could test on actual surfaces without the snow being present. Obviously, that's a little bit more difficult with a plow blade, but you get the idea that some of this stuff can be tested, or even with the plow blades, they can, manipulate those controls to make sure their hydraulics and all that stuff are working properly for that equipment. So inspections and tests, all that kind of stuff to get that equipment up and running. So it does hit, the equipment's ready to go. At some facilities, they'll also do like full scale winter response exercises. So, this kind of goes back to some of the things I've said about training in general of like, we don't rise to the occasion. We fall back to the highest level of training we received. So if they're out there putting some of their crews through the paces, they're getting those reps so that once the season shows up, they've been there before, so to speak. So, when I was doing my research, I was glad to see that that's a thing that they incorporate as well. It's not just like, oh, but the snow's coming. Let's take the new guy and show him what's happening. It's deliberate as far as how they're training their operators as well. Another interesting tidbit that I learned is, major airports like Minneapolis, Denver, Chicago, Toronto, and Canada, they can have as many as like 200 different specialized pieces of snow removal equipment. And this goes from the big stuff that you see on the runways all the way down to, smaller pieces of equipment that they might use in the ramp and gate areas to get those areas cleared. A case in point that I'll use as a comparison, I recently flew down to Dallas, Texas when they had their ice and snowstorms back in January. And when I did that, there was a drastic difference between the runway and field conditions in Dallas compared to Minneapolis. And I think what it comes down to is just like the equipment and the practice that they get at Minneapolis, they get really good at it. And Dallas just doesn't see that kind of weather very often. So yes, they have equipment. Yes, they can clear that space out, but I don't think it's as much an equipment or as efficient as a crew that does it all the time. So these crews do the best they can to get out there and close runways, clear them off as quickly as possible to get them back in operation and keep things rolling so you don't delay the system too much. Obviously, there's storms where that's just not possible, but they do the best that they can at keeping those runways clear. And some of the research that I did, they look at like a 15-minute clearance time for one of those long major airport runways. So, I mean, we're talking 10,000-foot runways, and they want to get them cleared in less than 15 minutes. Because again, every time that you close that runway for clearing it out, the longer that takes, the longer you're delaying flights. So maybe you've seen videos of things like this, but they basically form an echelon line of plows. It's basically like a snow ballet where you've got the plows that are kind of lined up. I'll show a video here at this part in the video podcast, but you've got the plows and pieces of equipment staggered so that they can keep pushing snow off of the runways themselves. So it's really carefully choreographed, and everyone has to be just in their right spot to move this machinery around that airport runway environment. Now, as with the aircraft on the ground, I'm sure you can imagine that these snow equipment operators, they're talking by radio as well. They've got to get clearances to do what they want to do on different surfaces, coordinating that through airport operations, as well as air traffic control for where they're going to be and how they're going to be operating. So they have control centers at these airports that essentially help to synchronize all of this stuff that's going on and coordinate and make this happen. So before they get out into these actual services they're going to be clearing, they have extensive briefings so people know what the forecast is, what the plan is, who's driving what, and they get that stuff all situated. It's not as many guessing games. It's not like you're trying to search for, all right, I get what truck again? Like there's a plan. So with that, they also know who's going to be driving where within this formation of vehicles and what they're going to be doing. I mean, you're controlling dozens of operators. You have to have that plan. So each one knows their specific job. They know what their role is in this operation and that timing and where they're at and how they do this. That all matters. Again, they want to keep these runways closed as short a time as possible. So next I learned about the equipment that they're actually going to put onto these surfaces to get things cleared. That convoy is usually going to start with the larger blade, higher speed plow trucks. These are huge pieces of equipment, and the blades on some of these higher speed plow trucks can be up to 20 feet wide. That can clear a lot of space pretty quickly for these runways. They're designed mostly to push the bulk of like the snow towards the sides of the runways so that the other equipment that are coming behind them can get it completely off. So they're going to be staggered, and you'll have the one in front and the next one behind and slightly to the side. The idea being is you don't want to leave rows along the runway. You want to get it as clear as possible, just like when they're plowing streets or highways in this part of the country. So from the one in the center all the way over to the side, you're slowly moving that snow from the center and getting it all cleared and off to the sides. After those plows go through, you've got some rotary blowers and some sweepers that'll come by afterwards. It's not done just because you got the bulk of the snow off. They need to get it really clear. But when you think of a rotary blower, think of like your snowblower you might use at home, or maybe you've seen on TV if you live in the South. These are large pieces of equipment that are going to have like a huge snowblower thing on the front. What they'll do is, depending on where you're at, they can blow that snow either onto the side of the runway, so you've got these berms along the sides, or in some circumstances, they'll put them into large like dump trucks, and they will take a bulk of that snow and move it away from the runway and operational environments. In some cases, they have like kind of a snow dump where you just dump all the snow. In other places, they have pieces of equipment where you can dump that snow in there. It will melt it down, clean it up a bit, and process it before it's put back into the water supply system. So just depends on the airport and the type of operation that they're running. But we're not done yet. They also have these high-speed brooms that come. Some of them are on larger pieces of equipment. Some of them are a little bit smaller. But those are next in our convoy of vehicles that are going to help get our runway surfaces clear. So these brooms, they can rotate really quickly. Some of them can be like the plows, like 20 feet wide. So while the plows are coming by and cleaning up the bulk of the snow, the job of these rotating sweepers is not to clean up like huge chunks of snow, but get rid of any film or buildup that might have come onto the runway surface from that precipitation or freezing, thawing, freezing, that kind of cycle. This layer is really thin and sometimes hard to recognize, but it does impact braking action for aircraft, so it is important to work through and get that off as well. All right, so next you've got like some chemical treatments, and we're not talking about the type of salt that you would see put on city streets in the northern climates. Salt is very corrosive to aircraft, so we don't want to use that out there. So they have specialized chemicals that you can use. They also have sand that they'll put down on surfaces to increase traction and reduce those icy areas. So they'll take that potassium acetate, they'll put it into their equipment, and they will spray it onto pavement and airport surfaces. And what it does essentially is it lowers the freezing point of the moisture that might be on those surfaces before ice can bond to the runway or pavement surfaces itself. So it's one thing to remove the snow. It is another thing entirely to make sure that you don't create an ice rink in its wake. Another thing you might not think about is all of the signage that might be around the airport or the side lighting. They also have specialized equipment that can work around those lighting that would actually save them a lot of time that would have been previously done by hand with hand shoveling. Now, from what I've seen with some of these airports, they do still have like crews that will go out to the actual signs and clear those off by hand. It's not as easy to just take a piece of equipment to that. But for the taxiway lights, which are all over the place, they do have equipment that will essentially like just work around the taxiway light, so it clears that snow off. To take all this equipment, you've got the people in command and control centers who are orchestrating this massive snow clearance ballet, if you will. And in the busy airports, again, they've got maybe 15 minutes to clear a 10,000-foot runway before it has to get reopened again and have aircraft coming in. And as you can imagine, snow doesn't just fall in a 10 to 15-minute period to that amount. So they're repeating this process over and over and over again for hours until the snow event is done and they get the airport cleared and completely open again. All right, now for the pilot's perspective, though I don't fly into a major airport like MSP, my airport definitely has snow and winter operations. So I have to understand what that means for me as a pilot and what braking actions are, things like that, so that I can safely operate in those winter environments. Otherwise, we shut down for months, and who wants to do that? So for the big guys and those who are working with instrument landing systems, let's talk first about visibility. Now, a lot of times as you're getting weather reports, in normal conditions, you're going to get a visibility of how many miles of visibility you have. Well, in some conditions, It's reported actually as an RVR, or runway visual range. What this means is that's really how far down the runway itself can the pilot actually see. So let's go back to our big airports. They're going to have sensors that are placed alongside the runways itself. And what that's going to do is it's going to detect how far light can travel when in snow or fog or other things that are going to restrict visibility. For those flying into your local municipal or reliever airports, you likely don't have RVR equipment installed. It's typically for airports that have higher precision approaches, so you are looking at those major airports in Class Bravo or Class Charlie airspaces where you're going to see stuff like this. All right, so it's wintertime, and let's say that you have great visibility at your airport. The next question you have is going to be important too. How slippery is that runway, and what is that braking action going to look like for you as you land? Well, the FAA has a solution for that as well with their takeoff and landing performance assessment systems. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. What does that mean when we talk about the runway conditions? What does the surface look like? Is it wet? Is it ice? Is it snow covered? How is my braking going to be impacted by that? And do I need to increase what I think is going to be my ground roll based on that? So a lot of airports, but not all, have specialized equipment that will be able to go out there and really measure what that condition of the field is. Essentially, what they'll do is they'll have a vehicle that they'll drive down the runway or surface, and they have a fifth wheel that is an aircraft wheel that comes down, and that will do their measurements and give them readouts and information they can use then to put together reports. Runway condition matrix that a lot of people talk about, it's on a scale of 0 to 6. So 6 is the best. That's a dry runway. You've got good braking action. From there, we go to 5. 5 is still going to be considered likely good braking action, but you may have a wet runway. You may have a little bit of frost on the surfaces, things like that. Still going to be pretty good, though. Next up would be 4, or good to medium for our braking action. Medium is what used to be called fair. They've replaced that term. So if you're not familiar with that, it happened like 10 years ago. So that's what they're talking about if they say medium. If you say fair, if you're asked for a report, you may be asked for clarification from the controllers. Typically, you're going to see a 4 with some compacted snow, nothing like too crazy, but it's certainly going to affect your braking a little. A score of 3. Typically, you're going to see a 3, which would be probably medium braking action when you've got that compacted snow, but now you've got fresh snow on top of it, whether it's wet snow, dry snow. It's another layer of snow, which could create issues for you when you're trying to brake. Could also be an increasingly wet runway surface, things like that. And finally, it can be some accumulation of snow. If we're talking over 1/8 of an inch, we're creeping into that 3 category and into that medium braking action. Once we get to 2, an example of that would be over 1/8 of an inch of water or slush on the runway. That's when we're medium to poor for our braking action. Down at 1, we're at poor braking action, so examples of this is an ice-covered runway. And finally, 0 or nil braking action, that's a situation where you've got an ice-covered runway. You've got ice or essentially any other type of precipitation or moisture over ice. So it could be slush, it could be snow, it could be water in general. Anything over ice, you're likely going to have nil for that braking action report, and you're going to have more difficulty maintaining directional control as well as braking your aircraft. If you're looking for more on this, it's an Advisory Circular 91-79A. So for many pilots, especially once you get to the commercial operations, those numbers mean something. It's not just a judgment call. They've got calculations, they've got performance charts, things like that. You can plug that information into those charts and come up with what is our likely landing distance. So for example, if you do those calculations and you don't have quite enough runway, you are likely going to have to divert to an alternate where braking conditions are better, or you have a longer runway. So say that all this goes as planned. Everything's well orchestrated. They're doing their best to keep the surfaces cleared. A massive airport is still going to be impossible to keep completely clear as long as the snow keeps falling. So as I said before, you're going to have situations where you've got those crews out there just repeating these surfaces over and over and over again, trying to keep that airport clear. But this is where the domino effect starts to kick in. So you may have a plane sitting there that's ready to go. You may have a crew that's ready to go. But depending on those delays, not just at your airport, but perhaps your destination or a hub that you have to go to, you may end up with delays at that airport as well. So what ends up kicking in is those duty time requirements to combat crew fatigue. So if they hit those requirements, they kind of turn into a pumpkin and the flight can't happen. And this isn't a fault of the aircraft itself or the crew not wanting to fly. They have legal limits on how much they can fly or how much availability they can have a certain day. And obviously, because aviation is a huge interconnected web, if you have major delays at Chicago or those major hubs, you're going to have delays across the system, because it's not just going to affect just Chicago. Say that you got a plane coming from Miami into Chicago. Now they have to be delayed because of metering to get into that airport or kind of staggering the aircraft and when they arrive. It will have a trickle effect to those other airports as well. You're tying up gates, you're tying up parts of the airspace, and now you could have a crew that's possibly stuck at one airport versus another, and they can't get to their next flight out. So a lot of things can happen that can make that domino effect that are going to delay flights elsewhere in the system. So I just want to say that the content of this episode is just based on my research of the topic and looking at what different airports do in these weather situations. If I get something wrong, by all means, let me know. Or if you are someone who actually goes out and clears out these runways and surfaces at the airports, I would love to hear from you and talk all about your job with you to share with our audience. I think it's fascinating the process that goes into keeping all these surfaces clear as best they can to keep airports rolling. There are certain situations they just have to shut an airport down because they just can't keep it clear or keep it safe enough for aircraft to arrive and depart. It happens. It happened during this last storm that came through our area. It's just the nature of flying in the weather like this. So long and short of it, if you've got a thought, opinion, or maybe goofed on something, let me know. You can send me an email, jim@flyingmidwest.com, or you can visit me on any of my socials and leave a message or leave a comment in this video if you're watching on YouTube. All right. Well, I think that's all I got for you for this episode. If you like what I'm doing, please share the podcast and the YouTube channel with others. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to leave me a rating or review, I would love to read it in future episodes. So always looking for that. Well, thank you so much for hanging out on this episode. This is AeroExploration, and we'll see you next time.